Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
A group of 4 friends, Mark, Ashley, Devin, and Jess, set off one late October weekend for a camping trip in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. These weren't casual hikers. They were experienced backpackers who prided themselves on venturing into places few others dared to go. That was the whole appeal. Isolation, solitude, the kind of silence that feels ancient. They parked their Jeep at the edge of a decommissioned logging road, packed their gear, and hiked in for hours. The forest grew darker and denser the deeper they went, swallowing the sounds of the outside world. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing near a dried-up riverbed. No paths, no signs, nothing but trees and the eerie stillness of a place untouched. That first night, everything felt perfect. The fire crackled, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and they passed around a flask, telling stories and laughing. But as midnight crept closer, the woods grew unsettlingly quiet. No wind, no rustling, even the insects seemed to vanish. Ashley commented on it first, saying it felt like the forest was watching them. They laughed it off and eventually went to their tents. Around 3 a.m., Jess shook Devin awake. Her voice trembled as she whispered that she heard footsteps, not animal sounds, human footsteps, crunching leaves slowly, deliberately, just beyond their camp. Devin crawled out of the tent and scanned the woods with his flashlight. Nothing. The beam caught nothing but thick trees and black voids between them. Still, he stood guard until sunrise. The next morning, they found large footprints circling the perimeter of their camp. Not boots, bare feet, wide, long, and sunken deep into the soil like whoever made them was heavy. They tried to rationalize it. Maybe another hiker? But they hadn't seen anyone. No other vehicles. No campsites. No trails leading in or out. Mark suggested it was a prank by someone local. He laughed it off again, but the laughter was thin. They decided to stay one more night, thinking they were just spooking themselves. That evening, the air grew heavy. The forest had a smell, like rot, like something dead had been sitting out in the sun. Flies began buzzing near the edge of the clearing, but they couldn't find the source. The fire wouldn't stay lit. It kept flickering out like it was being smothered. As darkness set in, the forest erupted with noises. Not animal calls, but banging, snapping, and what sounded like whispers echoing from all directions. They huddled close together, debating whether to pack up and leave immediately. Jess was crying softly, her hands clutched to her chest. That's when Ashley screamed. She pointed toward the tree line. Standing there, half in shadow, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, with long limbs that didn't look human. Its face was pale, featureless, like wet paper stuck to bone. No eyes, no mouth. Just a blank white face and a body that moved like it had too many joints. It stood still, then tilted its head, as if studying them. They ran, left their gear, just ran into the woods in whatever direction their feet would carry them. Branches sliced their skin, darkness swallowed the path. Mark twisted his ankle and fell, screaming for help. Devin turned back, but Mark was gone. The scream stopped mid-sentence, cut off like a radio signal. The 3 remaining friends didn't stop running until they hit the old logging road again, hours later, scratched, bruised, and shaking. A passing forest ranger found them the next day and led a search party back to the campsite. Mark was never found. Their gear was scattered, tents torn, backpacks shredded like something had clawed them apart. Near the edge of the riverbed, they found a set of footprints, the same bare, massive prints, but this time only one set, Mark's, and they led deeper into the woods until they simply stopped. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle, just vanished. To this day, Jess won't go near a forest. Ashley moved to the city and keeps her apartment lit day and night. Devin, the most rational one of them all, started seeing a therapist, though he won't say what he dreams about. All they'll agree on is this: there was something out there in those woods, and it wasn't human.
Story number 2.
4 years ago, a man named Kyle took a solo trip into the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. He wasn't new to backwoods camping. He grew up hiking and navigating dense wilderness, but this time, he wanted something different: total isolation. He wanted to unplug, be alone for a few days with nothing but trees, silence, and the weight of the forest. He hiked deep, farther than he'd ever gone before, choosing not to follow the official trails. He used a topographic map and compass, determined to avoid any paths frequented by other people. After a day and a half of hiking, he found a spot near a stream and set up camp. That first night, he felt uneasy. It was subtle at first. The woods were deathly quiet, which in itself wasn't unusual, but this silence felt off. It wasn't peaceful, it was tense. It was like everything out there had gone still at once, like they knew something he didn't. At around 1 a.m., he woke up to a strange sound, a voice, a woman's voice, maybe 30 or 40 feet from his tent, whispering something he couldn't quite make out. It was too far for the words to be clear, but it kept repeating, a gentle, rhythmic whisper. He froze. There was no way anyone else was out there. He had hiked miles into a section of the forest that even most rangers avoided. His campfire had burned low. There was no light, just the sound of water, wind, and the soft, persistent voice. Then the voice stopped. A second later, something scraped along the outside of his tent, slowly, from one corner to the other. It didn't sound like fingers or claws, more like a stick or a bone being dragged across the nylon. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the tent wall, like someone had rapped their knuckles once hard. Then silence. Kyle didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He stayed in his sleeping bag, clutching his knife, eyes fixed on the flap of his tent, convinced something was watching from just beyond the fabric. When daylight finally came, he crawled out and looked around. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of life at all. But hanging from a tree branch just above his tent was a small bundle of sticks tied together with red string, like some kind of totem. It hadn't been there the day before. He packed up and left immediately. On his way back, something strange happened. He kept seeing things, just barely out of view. Movement between the trees, figures standing too still. Once, he swore he saw someone crouched in the brush, facing away from him, whispering. He called out, but the figure didn't move. When he stepped closer, there was nothing there, just broken twigs and that same bundle of sticks, tied and hanging from a branch. He walked faster. Then he ran. He didn't stop until he saw the trailhead again. But when he reached his car, there were handprints on the windows. Small, smudged ones, not from dirty hands, but like the oil prints left by skin. One on the passenger window and one right on the glass of the rear windshield, inside. He left the forest and never went back. He doesn't tell people the full story anymore. Not because he's afraid they won't believe him. It's because sometimes at night, when his house is completely quiet, he hears the whispering again, just barely audible through the walls. A woman's voice, soft, saying his name.
Story number 3.
A retired surveyor named Tom bought a piece of land in rural Montana with the intention of building a small off-grid cabin. The property was cheap, nestled against national forest land, and completely surrounded by miles of untouched wilderness. It had no neighbors, no service, and no roads leading directly to it, just an old logging trail that barely showed up on any maps. Tom was a quiet man, used to solitude. He spent the first couple of weeks living out of his truck while clearing the land, chopping trees, and preparing to build. Every night he'd sit by a small fire, drinking coffee and listening to the wildlife. The place was quiet, peaceful. He loved it. Until the knocking started. The first time it happened was around 3 a.m. A loud, hollow knock echoed from somewhere in the woods. It sounded like a branch hitting a tree, but it was too deliberate. One knock, then silence. 10 minutes later, another. Always spaced out, always just one. Tom thought it might be a moose or maybe a bear brushing against trees. But the next night it happened again, and this time it was closer. It went on like that for 5 straight nights, each time the knock getting a little nearer to his camp. Still, he didn't panic. He'd been out in the wilderness for years. He'd seen all kinds of animals. But on the 6th night, something changed. Tom was falling asleep in his truck when he heard not 1, but 3 knocks, right against the driver's side door. He shot upright, grabbed his rifle, and opened the door, flashlight ready. There was nothing. No prints in the dirt, no eyes in the trees, just the quiet crackle of his dying fire. But in the morning, something was waiting for him. A pile of rocks stacked right outside the truck. 5 stones, perfectly balanced. The top one had a dead mouse impaled on a stick, sticking straight out of it. He told himself someone was messing with him, maybe a trespasser, maybe a local kid playing a sick joke. He left that day, drove 2 hours into town, and told the sheriff. The man raised an eyebrow, nodded slowly, and said, "You bought that lot off Old Man Hartley, didn't you?" Tom said yes. The sheriff just said, "Maybe don't stay out there too long." Back on the property, the unease grew. He kept hearing rustling in the trees. The knocks never stopped. And sometimes at night, he'd see movement, figures just outside the firelight. They never came close, never spoke, just stood there, watching. Then one night, Tom woke to the sound of a voice, deep, broken, like someone trying to speak through a bad radio. It was repeating something over and over. "Give it back, give it back, give it back." He sat frozen in the dark of his truck, rifle in hand, as the voice circled the camp. He couldn't see anyone, couldn't make out the shape, but he could hear it, pacing, repeating the same phrase. The next morning, everything he built, his supply pile, the frame of the cabin, his tools, was smashed, scattered, or missing. His axe was driven halfway through the hood of his truck. But the creepiest thing, hanging from the rearview mirror inside the cab, tied with twine, was a bundle of his own hair. He never found out who or what was out there. He left the property that day and never returned. He sold it back to the county for a loss, and now lives in a small apartment in Missoula. Ask him what happened, and he just says, the forest doesn't forget, especially when you build on something that wasn't ever meant to be yours.
Story number 4.
A few years back, a wildlife researcher named Elena was sent to the Yukon Territory to study wolf migration patterns. She was tough, experienced, and used to long stretches of solitude in some of the most remote places on the continent. Her assignment required her to spend several weeks in an isolated cabin deep within the forest, tracking wolf movements using hidden cameras and tagging systems. The cabin was built decades ago by trappers far from any road or town, only accessible by snowmobile or bush plane. For the first few days, everything went smoothly. Elena checked her cameras, recorded her findings, and spent her evenings by the fire with books and shortwave radio. She liked the stillness, but by the end of the first week, things started to feel wrong. One night, while reviewing footage from a trail cam posted several miles from the cabin, she noticed something strange. At first, it was just the wolves, moving quickly past the camera, running. But a few seconds later, a figure appeared behind them. Not a bear, not another animal, a man, barefoot, pale, naked, but his body was covered in strange black markings, like crude symbols scrawled across his chest and legs. His eyes caught the camera, wide, unblinking, almost glowing from the infrared light. The footage glitched right after that, just static. She thought it was corrupted, maybe interference, but something about that figure unsettled her deeply. The next day, she returned to that same camera. It had been ripped off the tree, torn clean off, the mount twisted and broken. There were no tracks around it, no prints, nothing. And when she returned to her snowmobile, she found something tied to the handlebars, a piece of leather cord strung with 3 small bones, human finger bones. She tried to radio for pickup, but the signal was dead. The shortwave only returned static, no matter how many channels she tried. That night, she locked herself in the cabin, loaded her rifle. She couldn't sleep. The woods outside were too quiet. No wind, no howls, no movement at all. Then around 2 a.m., she heard something brushing against the wall of the cabin. It circled slowly, dragging something, wood, bone, claws, across the outside. Then came the whispering, not from one voice, from many. Soft, layered voices repeating something in a language she didn't understand. The sound moved around the cabin like a wave. She sat on the floor, gun in her lap, holding her breath as the voices came closer, then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Just before sunrise, there was a knock on the front door. Not a pounding, just a soft, polite knock, like someone asking to be let in. She didn't answer. She waited, holding her rifle up at the door until daylight. When she finally opened it, there was no one there. But in the snow were dozens of bare human footprints, not just adult-sized. Some were tiny, like those of children. She hiked out the next day alone through the cold, dragging her gear behind her. When she got back to town, she reported what she'd seen. The station dismissed it. They said she'd likely hallucinated from isolation. Stress, maybe. Snow blindness. But a week later, when another team went to retrieve the rest of the equipment, they found the cabin completely empty. All the research gear, the tools, the food, gone. No signs of break-in. Just one thing left nailed to the wall above the fireplace. A piece of birch bark, charred at the edges, with a message carved into it in jagged letters. Don't come back. She's ours now. Elena doesn't do field work anymore. She left research altogether. If you ask her what happened, she won't talk about it. But she always keeps the lights on in her house at night, and she hasn't slept in complete silence since.
Story number 5.
A few summers ago, a college geology group went on a research expedition into the Appalachian Mountains to study rock formations in an area known for its deep caves and old mining tunnels. The trip was led by Dr. Alan Wright, a professor in his 60s, who had spent decades exploring remote terrain. Along with him were 4 students, Lena, Marcus, Joe, and Tyler. They set up camp near a remote ridge far off the beaten path, the kind of place with no cell reception and no recorded trails. The locals in the last nearby town warned them, half-jokingly, to stay out of the holes. They said weird things had happened up there. Lights in the woods, animals disappearing, people getting lost and never found. Dr. Wright brushed it off as folklore, but Lena remembered the way the old gas station attendant said it. The hills don't want company. On their second day, the group found the entrance to an uncharted cave. It was narrow and partially hidden beneath a collapsed rock face, but it opened into a wide tunnel that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The air coming out of it was freezing cold, and it smelled like wet rust and something else, something sour, organic. Despite the unease, Wright insisted on going in. They had lights, climbing gear, and supplies. The cave sloped downward gradually, and after about 200 feet, the tunnel split into 2. They marked the walls with chalk and chose the left path, which narrowed into a jagged passage with old wooden beams, clearly remnants of a mine shaft. That's when they started hearing the tapping, soft at first, like someone gently tapping on stone with metal.
Tap, 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 tap.
Joe thought it was just water dripping, but when they paused to listen, the tapping stopped. Then it would start again, deeper in. They pushed further in. The air grew heavier, colder. Then Marcus noticed something on the walls, scratches. Not like tool marks, more like claw marks. Deep grooves, erratic, some of them 8 feet off the ground. Wright dismissed them, but the students were visibly shaken. About an hour in, their lights began to flicker. Then the tunnel ahead opened into a chamber, and all of them stopped. There were bones, animal bones mostly, but also what looked like human remains. Small, old, crumbling, a pile of them, and above it, scrawled in soot across the rock wall, were 3 crude words: "Don't follow it." They turned to leave. That's when Tyler screamed. He was staring into the tunnel they'd come from. Something was standing there, tall and thin, its skin the same color as the rock, almost blending in. It had no eyes, no nose, just a mouth, open, stretched far too wide with rows of tiny jagged teeth. It didn't move like a person. It twitched, shifting angles like a glitch in reality. The lights went out. Chaos erupted. Someone dropped their gear. Someone else ran. In the dark, Lena said she heard whispers, raspy voices repeating her name over and over. Lena, Lena, Lena. Something brushed her arm. Cold, wet. They found each other outside the cave entrance over an hour later, except for Dr. Wright. He never made it out. A search party was dispatched the next morning. No signs of Wright, no bones, no markings, just a collapsed tunnel, like the cave had swallowed itself back up. Lena dropped out of school. Tyler stopped speaking entirely for 6 months. Joe developed a fear of the dark so intense she now sleeps with the TV on and can't be underground, not even parking garages. Sometimes, late at night, Lena still hears the tapping. 3 short taps, then silence, always from the darkest corner of the room, always just before she falls asleep.
Story number 6.
In the summer of 2016, a man named Daniel took a seasonal job as a fire lookout in a remote part of northern Idaho. The tower was old, built in the 60s, and perched high on a rocky hill deep in the forest, miles from the nearest town, and accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through miles of uninhabited wilderness. The job was simple: monitor for wildfires, log any weather changes, and radio in daily reports. Daniel welcomed the solitude. He'd recently gone through a divorce and was looking forward to disappearing for a while. The first week went by peacefully. Endless pine trees, cool nights, and the occasional distant coyote howl. But around the 10th night, things changed. At 3:17 a.m., Daniel was woken by the distinct sound of footsteps climbing the metal stairs of the tower. That shouldn't have been possible. No one else was scheduled to be there, and he hadn't heard any vehicle approach. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out onto the deck, calling out. No answer, just the sound of the wind in the trees. He scanned the forest below. No movement, no footsteps, nothing. Thinking maybe he dreamed it, he went back to bed. The next morning, he found something on the final step of the staircase, a small, perfectly smooth river stone set upright on its narrowest edge, balanced so precisely that the slightest breeze should have knocked it over. He checked the logs, no reports of hikers or visitors. The forest was supposed to be empty. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, he didn't hear footsteps, but he woke up suddenly, gasping, heart racing. When he checked outside, he found 3 stones, one on the step, one on the deck, one right outside the door, all upright, balanced. He radioed it in the next morning, but the dispatchers said it was probably kids messing around, or maybe he was just seeing things. The nearest town was over 30 miles away. No one else had a key to the gate. The following night, he stayed up, rifle by the window, eyes locked on the stairs. At exactly 3:17 a.m., he heard it again, slow, deliberate steps. But when he looked, the stairs were empty. No shadow, no figure. Then he heard breathing, just outside the glass. He spun around, rifle raised, but saw nothing. The deck was clear, but on the window, there was condensation, like someone had stood there breathing against it. He bolted the door, didn't sleep. The next day, when he climbed down to check the area, he found something worse. His footprints circling the base of the tower, but they weren't his. They were bare feet, wide, flat, with impossibly long toes. Dozens of prints, like someone had walked circles around his tower all night. He tried to quit, tried to leave, but when he got to the gate at the bottom of the access road, it was chained shut with a lock he didn't recognize. Heavy, rusted, old. He radioed again, panicked. The dispatcher told him help would come in the morning. That night, the footsteps didn't come up the stairs. This time, they were on the roof. He heard them pacing, slow, back and forth. Then something started scratching the metal. Long, deep, dragging scratches like claws being drawn across the ceiling. Daniel stayed in the corner of the room, clutching the rifle until sunrise. When backup arrived, they found him sitting in the same spot, eyes bloodshot. The metal roof above him scarred with deep, gouged marks, 4 parallel scratches over 6 feet long. He never returned to the tower. The replacement lookout quit after 2 nights. No explanation. The tower still stands, but no one works it anymore. Rangers say it's out of service. Locals call it the Dead Mile Post because it sits exactly 1 mile from a stretch of forest where compasses spin, animals go quiet, and if you're out there after dark, you'll sometimes see a figure standing at the tree line. Not moving, just watching.
Story number 7.
Back in 2009, a group of spelunkers, 5 experienced cavers from Colorado, set out to explore an uncharted cave system in the Black Hills of South Dakota. It was known among locals as Crow Hollow, though it didn't appear on any official maps. They had gotten the location from an old man at a roadside bar who told them, "That place isn't forgotten, it's ignored. There's a difference." They should have listened. The team, Alyssa, Bryn, Diego, Nate, and their leader, Kyle, hiked out to the cave over a weekend, armed with top-tier gear, climbing tools, headlamps, and backup radios. The cave's mouth was barely visible behind a thicket of trees and brush. The entrance dropped steeply, and once they descended, they found themselves in a vast chamber with multiple tunnels branching in every direction. From the very start, things felt off. The walls weren't like normal caves, no smooth limestone or dripping stalactites. Instead, they were jagged, like something had torn through the rock with impossible force. The air was dry and strangely warm, and the light from their lamps seemed to absorb into the rock, like the walls were drinking it. A few hundred feet in, they started finding marks, deep, unnatural carvings. Not graffiti, not mining signs, just long, spiraling gouges in the walls, as if claws had spun in wild circles again and again. They joked nervously, called it the cave's fingerprint. By the second hour, their radio stopped working. Then Alyssa found the ribbon, a frayed, sun-faded red ribbon tied to a stone protruding from the ceiling, about shoulder height. It looked decades old. There was no way anyone else had been down that deep, at least not recently. They decided to turn back, just to be safe. That's when they realized something horrifying. Their chalk marks were gone. Every arrow, every symbol they'd drawn to map their way back, erased. Scrubbed completely clean, but the walls hadn't been touched by any hands. The gouges were still there, and now they looked fresher, wet even, as if they'd been made just moments before. Nate swore he saw something shift behind them, a shadow not cast by their lights, moving wrong, crawling but upright. Kyle told them to stay calm and keep walking. They had compass backups. They'd be fine. That's when the screaming started. Bryn went first. 1 second he was behind them, the next his headlamp vanished. No scream, no shout, just gone. Like the cave swallowed him. They turned around, yelling his name, but all they heard was breathing. Not theirs. Deep, heavy, wet breathing from somewhere in the dark. Then Diego's light started flickering. He panicked and sprinted ahead. Alyssa and Nate chased him while Kyle tried to radio through static. The tunnel split, and in the chaos they separated. Alyssa and Nate eventually stumbled into a chamber that wasn't on any map. It was round, impossibly smooth, and bone dry. Lined with bones, hundreds of them. Small brittle bones stacked in piles, arranged in spirals. And at the center of the room, embedded in the wall, was something that didn't look like rock at all. It was a face, human-like, stretched across the stone, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, like it had been absorbed into the cave itself, fused, trapped. Then the whispering began, soft, almost hypnotic. It came from the walls, but also from inside their heads. Nate dropped to his knees, clutching his skull, screaming that it was showing him things. Alyssa tried to drag him out, but he suddenly went still and started speaking in a voice that wasn't his, deeper, crueler, and not in English. She ran, didn't stop until she saw daylight. A search team recovered her 3 days later, barefoot, dehydrated, and alone. She couldn't explain how she got out, couldn't even retrace her steps. The entrance had partially collapsed, and no signs of the others were ever found. To this day, Alyssa won't go near caves, won't go near dark tunnels, and sometimes when she sleeps, she wakes up with dirt in her mouth. Her ears ring with whispering in a language she's never heard but somehow understands. And when she looks in the mirror, sometimes just for a second, she swears she sees something move behind her eyes.